Yeah, well, I mean, I love mushrooms. One of my favorite foods are mushrooms. The lowly white button mushroom that everybody has had. I've been doing research on it, and it's got beta D glucan, which is a soluble fiber. The fiber is prebiotic, but mushrooms, of course, grow naturally in the wild. Many times they're harvested from the wild, but even when they're grown kind of in a dark place that has lots of bacteria, and so very likely eating mushrooms not only gives you good dietary fiber for your gut microbiome, but also has some of these other probiotic benefits as well. What's interesting is that most people who buy a mushroom, and I'm just talking about the lowly white button mushroom right now, what do? You bring it home, you might rinse it off, you put it on a cutting board, you cut off the cap, which is what we eat, and I used to do this myself, throw away the stems, you know? But it turns out when you look at the amount of the soluble fiber, beta D glucan, which is good for your gut, and by the way, good for your vascular system as well, and good for your immune system, another health defense system, it turns out that the stem, it's called the stipe, actually has twice as much of the beta glucan as the cap. And so I always tell people, and I do this myself now, I always find something to do with the stem. Go back to many cultures, Latin American cultures, Mediterranean cultures, Asian cultures. They're always using the stem for their food. You slice it up, you can put it into a blender. There's all those kinds of things you can actually do with it. And then what's interesting is if you take a look at the fact that the lowly white button mushroom, it has a lot of good stuff to it. Let's step it up and see what these other mushrooms that are eaten can do. Golden chanterelle mushrooms, packed, loaded with beta glucan. Porcini mushrooms, another kind of culinary mushroom, really delicious, also loaded with beta D glucan. Maitake mushroom from Asia, tons of beta D glucan. And so, one of the things that I think that we've been alluding to is that, when you talk about a healthy food like mushrooms, what we're really talking about is a group of plants that when you analyze them, some have even better properties than others. And that's another future frontier that I think is super exciting that I'm starting to do, is to say, which one of the edible mushrooms that we actually have is most potent. And we can do that with the same thing with nuts. We can do the same thing with brassica and leafy greens. In the future, you talked about champagne and how you rate the champagne, or wine, how they rate the wine. I think there needs to be kind of a rating system of potency across in the produce section. So in addition to the cost per pound and whether it was organic or locally grown, we have another number that gives us a scent or color that tells us how much potency is in the product that we're going to select.
I think that's a great idea. We're gonna put you in charge of that labeling system. I'm going to make you the FDA commissioner, and you're going to come out with the new food label. Probably be far more useful than the one we currently have.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So, foods that boost the immune system. Mushrooms get, a high mark for their ability to boost the immune system. And certainly a lot of it is the soluble fiber that's available. In other words, they feed good gut bacteria, which in turn influence Tregs, and we could go on and on. Are these foods, they're miraculous to improve your immune system? We shouldn't be using those terms, should we?
The terms like miraculous?
Yeah.
No, honestly, I think that it is stunning to realize that the foods that we grew up with can do much more than we thought. But I don't think it's a miracle. I think that, like foods aren't, there's no such thing as a true superfood. What I think is really super is the body is super. The body is actually super. And, to the extent the human body is kind of a miracle of creation, if you think that way, the reality is that what's amazing is that ordinary foods that we can put into our breakfast table or have for a snack or whatever, what we're beginning to discover is they do a lot more than we thought they did, and they do it a lot better. So something like a blueberry, for example, is really great for the immune system. Those anthocyanidins that actually make the blueberry blue actually has something beneficial to it. Tree nuts like walnuts, it's got dietary fiber and some healthy fats. Though they also play a role in actually helping our gut microbiome as well. So I think that, the things that, people have enjoyed eating, we're now beginning to nail down what they might be doing to specific aspects of our health. And as we discover the mechanisms, the manner by which they improve our health, I think it helps us just, and I think it takes it down to earth, in fact. It's the opposite of a miracle. It's sort of like, oh, I get it. Eating these foods is actually good for my immune system. Well, actually, isn't that what your grandmother told you too? And so I think that it actually helps us make more sense of the world around us.
Well, we talk about foods that are good for our immune system. It probably goes without saying there are foods that we should avoid. You want to rattle off a few?
Well, this is what I tell patients. There's a whole category of foods that actually kind of damage, devastate, and even can destroy your health defenses, lower your shields against all kinds of diseases, not just one of them. And, they're the ones that you've been hearing about all over the place. And, ultra processed foods, added sugars, alcohol, artificial sweeteners, artificial preservatives, artificial colorants, the things that actually came out of the 1950s to make foods more colorful and cheaper and more tantalizing to look at, things that were, sort of, I would say it's sort of a cheap trick to actually make us attracted to certain foods like, bait, not the real deal. They're distracting. Those are the kinds of things I think an overage of red meats and processed meats especially also have been found to be harmful to not only the gut, but other health defenses as well. And so, if you sort of, and, here's the thing, a lot of these things are found in a typical American diet, but I don't like to use that term either. I don't like to use the term Western diet, although it is an accepted kind of bucket to use. I think that, the West depends on where you start from. A lot of people would call something West. I think that, what in general, manufactured foods that transform the whole basic plant food or animal food into a form or a substance and mixes it with other additives into a form that doesn't appear in nature and usually can be stored for an unusually long period of time in a box or a can. That's kind of the definition of something that's not so good for us. Look, and to be realistic, we live in a society where that kind of stuff is all over the place. So, and a lot of us have habits, and some of us even like that stuff. So, you're going to eat it every now and then. I think the message that we're sending is just realize that stuff actually forces you to take a step back in your health, not a step forward. So what you want to do is just focus more time, more emphasis on eating foods that take a step forward, because, every now and then you take a step back. That's okay. As long as you keep on marching forward in terms of your health, that's what we're all looking for. And that's really based on the beneficial foods that we've been talking about.
Yeah. 3 years ago, we lost our home in the mudslide in Montecito, California, and we had to buy a new house. And the house we bought actually came furnished, thankfully. And in the kitchen was this humongous jar, glass jar, filled with layers of Oreo cookies. And it was almost kind of a decoration. Right next to it was a big jar of Taco Bell seasoning. But anyhow, so we decided to leave it there. And so we've owned the house for 3 years now. That jar of Oreo cookies is as pristine as when we moved in. There has been no fermentation, there has been no degradation, and I tell myself every time I look at it, if a bacteria or a fungus won't come near this, why in the world would I want to eat it? It's 3 years now and counting.
That's quite amazing. And I think that if we thought a little bit more about all these synthetic chemicals that are preserving, embalming our foods, mummifying our foods effectively. It makes it a little bit less appealing to actually eat it. And it's actually the complete opposite of the fermentation aspect of the food, where you get something by preserving it for a longer period of time. You actually get something benefit. Here is actually something just quite the opposite. By the way, I also want to kind of, just bring this up as a point when you talk about Oreos. Oreos are technically a plant-based food, so you got to be careful when you hear about, plant-based this, plant-based that. Just because the word plant is in it doesn't mean it's good for you.
No, I think that's so important, because we are now seeing more and more ultra-processed plant-based foods and plant-based meats that are still ultra-processed. They are not anything of the original ingredients, and we have to be very careful. You and I both like plants, but a plant is not a plant if you chop it up and change its character and do a protein isolate of a plant.
And I would argue that if you were eating a really great quality sirloin burger every once in a while, compared to eating a plant-based, ultra-processed, genetically modified, plant-based meat burger every night, okay, that distracts you from eating other whole plant-based foods because you think you're getting the plants, you're probably better off just enjoying a treat every now and then with the real deal.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. We hopefully this trend will die a natural death, but I don't think so. I think it's going to contribute to our death in a way that people don't realize.
Well, it's that kind of desire to innovate and think, sort of not take the long view. What I think is, maybe a helpful message for people to think about is we're also at a time in the history of human society where we're beginning to look back at some of the old traditions that have been preserved and valued for hundreds of years, generations. And I think that, there's something wonderful to recognize that what your grandma and my grandma and their grandmothers actually passed down, it's not lost, it's still around. And actually it tastes just as good to actually make those recipes today as it did back then, with the added knowledge of the health that they can actually bring. Our grandmothers didn't have that knowledge before, now we do.
Yeah, a lot of them didn't know why these wives' tales existed, but now we're realizing, holy cow, there's a scientific basis for what they were doing.
That's right.
So, yeah, that's a very important thing. Lastly, before we let you go, where does sleep fall in all of this? You could have the healthiest diet in the world, you could take care of your gut health, but where's sleep fit in all of this?
You're bringing up such an important aspect of health. There's a reason that those of us who actually are trying to care for patients usually say diet and lifestyle and not just diet alone. And, just like as a medical doctor, a physician, we are looking at aspects of the entire body, everything is interconnected. So too is an aspect of our lifestyle called sleep that actually really is important for running that engine of health for the rest of our body, including our health defenses, properly. And so one of the things that I think is quite important and amazing is that while most of us believe that when we're sleeping, we're off the grid, we're relaxed, we're not doing anything. Well, at least our bosses don't think we're doing anything when we're sleeping. The reality is that, from a medical and a scientific perspective, our bodies are working really hard. They just shifted gears. They're doing a night shift when we are actually sleeping. And in that sleep state, our body is cranking up stem cells. It's renewing our stem cell population, rebuilding our immune system. It's right-sizing and cleaning up and doing the landscaping of our microbiome. The ecosystem is helping getting rid of and pruning away some of the old bacteria. It has a process called autophagy, which actually is cleaning out all the dead cells and dying cells that have been, got toxins on them, getting rid of those. One of the things that's really amazing that, people think that they're just asleep and unconscious more or less, maybe unless they're dreaming, is that when you're in deep REM sleep, there is a whole new sewer system that opens up in our brains called the glymphatic system. These glymphatics are like the sewers of Paris. They're incredibly engineered. They open up only when you have good quality deep sleep, and they drain out all the toxins and garbage and oxidative stress, factors that have accumulated during the day. So if you're not sleeping well, you don't feel so great the next day. You might be foggy, you might be grumpy. There's a reason for it. Our system hasn't been reset. We haven't been rebuilt. The engine was stressed out. It's kind of like running your car, driving your car all night long. That engine is really hot under the hood. You need to rest that car. And that's, and by the way, like all those other good things that we do with our food doesn't get processed. We're not getting the most of our food if we're not getting good sleep as well.
Yeah, exactly. Well-made point. This is when the maintenance of the body is being done, and if we don't have routine maintenance on this engine, it's not going to work. It's not going to work, and that's our maintenance period. You're right. All right. What other fun stuff are you doing? Any exciting research that you've done or just kind of run into that you can share with us today?
Well, I'll do a recent research finding that I found absolutely jaw-dropping that actually relates to the microbiome and other topics that I know that you're interested in, which is resistant starches. So there was a recent study that came out looking at a population, almost 1,000 people, that actually have a genetic mutation that they inherit from their parents. So it's really kind of a time bomb, a ticking time bomb genetically that makes you more likely that you might develop cancer. And these are the people that have heritable colorectal cancers. They can develop ovarian cancers, and Lynch syndrome is what it's actually known as. And if you have that, and it can be detected by genetic screening, then your doctor is going to say you really need to actually have your earlier. You need to have your regular overall health checks. And as I said, it's kind of a time bomb, like where the fuse gets lit on the day you're born. Well, they actually started to study the impact on diet and impact on dietary factors. And what they found is that resistant starches can lower the risk of all the cancers in this 1,000-patient study that come from Lynch syndrome by 60% if they add resistant starches to the diet. Now, how much do they need to add? I'm always into food doses. So what's the dose that you would need? And you can calculate this from the clinical trials. It's just a way to actually start doing a little bit of math to figure out, like, well, how much did they use, and what is it related to? The amount of resistant starch that they gave to each of these patients in the clinical study was the equivalent that you would find in one green banana. That's it.
Wow, that's
to really be able to have that impact. What's the explanation? Not fully known. There's a microbiome involved, yes, because they actually looked at the microbiome and they actually were starting to study it. Like, that's really going to be the starting point to understand this phenomenon. But here's an example where new research that's just like a week old actually is teaching those of us in the medical science community there is something, again, we need to pay attention to that could be beneficial for our patients. And because, these heritable cancers, genetically driven cancers, are such a tough nut to crack, right? And there's so many of these that, we worry about. I think that it just shows to us just how powerful our food is. It's another underlining of how important our gut microbiome is. And I think it's exciting, that patients with those kinds of syndromes now have another avenue that they can look to that is in their hands, not in the healthcare system's hands, but that they can actually start to think about, well, how do I incorporate this research finding into my own life?
Yeah, I think as a corollary to that, I think you and I are both aware that many of these cancers have their own distinct microbiome.
Yeah.
We now know there's a microbiome of pancreatic cancer, there's a microbiome of breast cancer, and I think any glandular structure has a connection to the outside world in one way or another, whether it's breast tissue. The pancreas connects to our GI tract, which is technically the outside world. And I think the whole idea that maybe we should be paying attention to these bacterial species and what they want, how to stop an overgrowth of one that is, oncogenic. I think it just opens up this whole crazy field of, wow, food is medicine, and down to the oncogene.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, two things. One, another great idea that somebody could work on one day is if we could, we began to appreciate the splendor of the natural world. Back I think two or 300 years ago, when they started to create zoos to just show us what an elephant looked like and what a tiger looked like. I think it'd be really awesome to create kind of like an exhibition of the microbiome to show us what's in the pancreas and what's in the normal pancreas versus a cancer. And we can begin to learn that. And like children can begin to use that as part of their basic education. At the same time they're learning about lions and tigers and bears, they can start learning about the incredible organisms in our bacteria that are good for us. And then to use that to connect to food.
Look, Mommy, I want some more Akkermansia muciniphila.
Exactly.
All right. Well, this has been fun. What's next for you? I know you've got a new YouTube series. Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, I have a series called Dr. Lee and Friends, and you were kind enough to come on to it, and it was a lot of fun. It's a basic opportunity to put a fly on the wall and for viewers, and to watch me have a conversation with my friends and colleagues, like Dr. Stephen Gundry, about things that we care about, things that we're interested in, things that we've seen or experienced recently. It's a little bit of an unplugged kind of conversation that, if you've ever been to a dinner table where you watch two people having a conversation, like, oh man, they're talking about some interesting stuff. That's what I'm doing. So I'm having conversation with different people that I know, and I'm inviting people in to my world into sort of the things that I'm thinking about. And I think the last time when we were doing it, we were talking about our travels and what we discovered in terms of food, and how do we connect our day jobs of thinking about food and health into the things we see in real life when we're on our holidays. A lot of people just think that we're real people that do real things just like everyone else, and so this is just a little opening the curtains and letting people peek in to see what we're really like in real life.
You can find this on YouTube. And where do they learn about you and Eat to Beat Disease?
Yeah, so I'm easy to find. It's Dr. William Lee, li.com on the web. If you want to look for my handle, it's at Dr. William Lee, Dr. William Lee, li. I've got TikTok. I did a little piece last week that's got 1.6 million views. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook, and I think that the fact of the matter is that there's a lot of cool things to talk about, including the stuff that we talked about today that people just love to hear about, and I love to talk about it. So please come to Dr. William Lee, sign up for my free newsletter. I do a master class. I've got all kinds of different projects I'm working on. And one of my favorite things is to talk to folks like you, my friends and colleagues, about the things that we care about, which is food as medicine.
Perfect. All right. Before I let you go, I told you that we have an audience question. And sometimes I ask my guests to hop in on this. So without ado, the audience question comes from Singad Adductus on YouTube. He says, is exercise imperative for reducing all-cause mortality, or is it overrated? You're first.
Is exercise overrated? No. Exercise, actually, I like to be very precise with my words, because exercise means a lot of different things. I think of exercise as a range of physical activity that starts from just moving regularly, like even going for a walk after dinner for 20 or 30 minutes, to really going to the gym and working out, to actually competing in something athletic like cycling or jogging or going on a marathon. That's all exercise. And I cannot underscore how important that is for us as humans, not only from the time we're little kids, but also as we get older, to remain limber, to agile, flexible. Movement, exercise actually helps our circulation. That circulation stimulates our stem cells. When you're exercising, physically active, our breathing is better. You know, a lot of us just, when you're sitting on the couch, you know, not only your lungs scrunched up, you're not taking full breaths. When you're walking and swinging your arms, or you're jogging, you're biking, or swimming, you're taking big physiological breaths that are good for us. So what I would say is that exercise as a range of activities is vital in order to remain vital. And is it overrated? I suppose that's, depending on what type of advertising you're looking at. But I certainly don't overrate it. I think there's a range of activity that's appropriate for each individual. And just like diet and just like food and just like everything else for health, find out what works for you, tailor it to yourself. This is a kind of exercise is kind of a physical activity, a DIY type of activity. You don't need a doctor to tell you exactly what to do or to monitor it. This is something you can do just at home yourself.
Yeah, speaking of, you and me learning from travel experiences, one of the things I've noticed looking at long-lived people or healthy people is a great number of them walk after dinner. And they stroll. And there's a new meta-analysis that just came out, I think, yesterday, looking at the benefit of walking after dinner, even for 3 to 10 minutes, changing the rise in glucose, changing insulin release. And, come on, just 3 to 5 minutes after you eat. And you look at these healthy people and, they stroll after dinner. And that's an easy thing to do.
That's low-hanging fruit, as they say.